So the first thing in our learning unit we're going to talk about is classical conditioning. So we have a few terms we need to know. The first one is the unconditioned stimulus. I did put a demonstration up on Classroom a while ago when we talked about classical conditioning. So in this example of the demonstration of flicking Mitchell with water, the unconditioned stimulus was the water at the face. So flicking the water at the face, that is the stimulus. The unconditioned response then, because of that water at the face, is the flinching. So we have an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. These two go together. So a stimulus is something that promotes something to happen, and then the response is something that happens because of that stimulus. So again, the water at the face was the unconditioned stimulus, and then the unconditioned response was the flinching or those facial expressions that he was making. The next two things we have are a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned response. So the conditioned stimulus is that new thing. So every time I said the word can, he also had a response that was similar to the flicking of the water. So a conditioned stimulus is that new thing that happens. So the sound of the word can produced a conditioned response of him flinching or making facial expressions. So every time I said the word can, without the water, he still made that flinching or facial expressions. So this is an example of classical conditioning. So we have an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, and a conditioned response. So those two responses should be the same. So the unconditioned response and unconditioned response should be the same thing. So they're both flinching or those weird facial expressions. The unconditioned stimulus should be the original thing that produces something. So being scared, loud noises, flicking water at someone, throwing a ball at them, things like that. That would be an unconditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus is then that new thing that is now paired up with the old thing. So the sound of the word can now produces this sense of scared because he was getting flicked with the water. We also have a few other words we need to know. So we have the word acquisition, extinction, and spontaneous recovery. So acquisition is sort of like we're training, we're making associations, like pairing. I can't spell associations. And then we have extinction, which is the weakening or disappearance of that conditioned response. So extinction, something going extinct, it's going away. We then have spontaneous recovery. So it's that reoccurrence of that thing. So it occurs after extinction. So acquisition, again, is just the training. So producing those associations or pairings with things. So acquisition was what we did with this example. When I was flicking water in Mitchell's face, we were pairing that with the word can. That is an example of acquisition. Extinction is when that would disappear. So when I was flicking Mitchell in the face with water, every time I said the word can, I eventually stopped flicking the word water, but still said can. Eventually, he stopped flinching. This is an example of extinction. It's the weakening or disappearance of that flinching. And then spontaneous recovery also happened in that example. I all of a sudden started flicking him with water again every time I said that word can. So after we had the extinction, I started flicking with water again, and that is called spontaneous recovery, and it all of a sudden occurs again. We also talked about generalization. And this happens when we associate things with other things, so things that are similar, so we're generalizing everything. So the example we talked about was the study with little Albert. So we watched those videos and read that article about little Albert. And what happened there was that they conditioned him to be scared of a white rat because they banged a noise every time the white rat came around. What happened in this, for the example of generalization, is that every time they put anything that was small and white near him, so I think there was a puppy, maybe a lamb, a fur coat, a rabbit, he was also scared of those things. So it's making associations, I can't spell that word, making connections with similar objects. So we're making connections with similar objects. So again, that was the example in little Albert. With the bunnies and the fur coat. So those things all looked like that rat that he was shown. We also talked about a Pavlov's article. I marked those and put corrections on them if I needed to. So Pavlov did a study. The same thing with acquisition. He found out that dogs were conditioned to salivate every time they saw food. And then eventually they salivated as soon as they saw the white coats of the people who used to give them food because they associated with the white coats with the food.